Welcome to Call to Serve. As many of you who watch our program know, we've interviewed seminarians and religious sisters and priests. Today we're going to be talking about another important ministry in the church, that of the permanent deacons. As we are joined today by Deacon Richard Grant, we're going to hear about how he was called to serve. Welcome to our program today. From the very early time in the church's history, it was clear that the bishops needed special helpers who were going to help them in the ministry of the diocese. These helpers were very early on referred to as deacons, and they would be a part of the important ministry of the church, both in the liturgy and in the service of the people. We have with us today Deacon Richard Grant, who has joined us to tell us how he felt the call to this important ministry, the permanent diaconate. Welcome, Deacon.
Thank you, Father Matthew. Thank you for having me on.
Would you tell us a little bit today about how it is that you ended up in this important ministry in the church?
Sure, I'd love to. You know, back when I was in high school, growing up in Covington, Louisiana, I went to the St. Paul School, good boys Catholic school over there in Covington. And there was probably a calling, as I look back on it now, for me to maybe at that point in time become a religious brother or even a priest. There were several men in my life, brothers, priests from around the area who had spoken with me, talked to me about it. I felt like a football player being recruited almost, to go to their school. But as a young, immature boy that I was of 18 years of age, 17 years of age, it wasn't something that I was really ready to commit to. It wasn't something that I can say, well, yes, this is really what I want to do with the rest of my life, because I had no idea what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So I came here to Baton Rouge, went to LSU here, but through all that time, there was probably this gnawing all the time that said, something with the church is something that you need to get back into. We flash forward after I had married my wife that I met while at school. Having been married a couple of years, that call came back to me, which was something that I needed to discern. And it just so happened that in 2001, a very good priest friend of mine, Father Mark Beard, had come back from Medjugorje saying, tell me about the trip and how great the trip was, and that this was something that, he thought that I would really enjoy doing, which, as it turns out, I did. My mother said, look, I know that this is a trip you want to take. Here's the money, go and enjoy it. And I did. And it was during that time when the calling to the diaconate became stronger than it ever had before. And it just so happened that I met a fellow there who was also going through the diaconate process, somebody who I'd never met before. And he and I spent lots of time talking about the diaconate and not necessarily discerning it officially there, but just talking about it while we were having the experience of the trip. When I returned home, I spoke with Deacon Albert Ellis, who at the time was in charge of the diaconate here in Baton Rouge. And then I started going through the process. My wife and I discerned the diaconate. Father Vic Messina led the discernment for the deacons. I went through the RSI classes, those classes that we had to have beforehand, and started the process right after. And it was a great formation process, a great ride. Something that maybe I should have been doing a long time before I was doing it. But it was certainly something that I really enjoyed, just the process of being on board for the diaconate.
Well, you packed a lot into that very short testimony, so I want us to unpack a few of the parts. Sure. You mentioned your mom and her support for you in going to Medjugorje. Tell me a little bit, when you were growing up, what were the religious influences in your family? I mean, did you have a devout family? Were you raised in the church? I mean, what were the foundations that were laid early on?
And that was certainly my mom. from what I can remember beginning as a child, I mean, we always went to church on Sundays. My dad, not so much. My dad wasn't he was the couple of times a year guy. But my mom, every Sunday, we got in the car and went to Mass. When I was old enough to become an altar server, then I did that. I was involved in the different youth activities that our church had with youth. And it was different for me going through what was back then CCD, because I went to public grammar school. So I did the CCD I believe it was on Sundays at our church. And then when I got into Catholic high school at St. Paul's, then the things that we do through the Catholic school stayed a part of what I did. Growing up, I missed a lot of the things that young children learn today, which, then my wife kind of filled me in on a lot of the things that I missed as a kid. I didn't do novenas. I didn't pray the rosary often. That wasn't something that we did in high school. I'd heard of it, but it's not something that we really did. So my mom was a big influence, and she still is today. My mom was a big influence on me in my formation. My wife certainly through the adult years and the time that we've been together, which is over 25 years now, and so what my mom instilled in me, my wife cultivates today. My mom still being alive, she goes to daily Mass every single day, and so she's whenever she brags on her son, the Deacon, which is glad, but she had a very big part in the formation that I have.
Well, that's an important point for us to bring up because, of course, some of the parents who are watching today, they're thinking of their children, and maybe their children want to get married. And this is a good opportunity to think about, well, if they have good faith foundation, maybe something like the diaconate might be in their future. So this is a good opportunity then for also to hear about what your mother did. And growing up, your family, did you pray together? Did you have devotions like the Advent wreath or things like that in your home?
And we did, but again, it was very simple. It's not like what we've done today. We did pray together, my mother and me. We did have the Advent candles around the dinner table and all those things, but it wasn't as much as looking back what I do with my own family. My wife and I immerse our children in the faith and those little things around the house that we do. So we had some, but again, not a whole lot. And my wife has done a really good job of filling in the holes, filling in all the gaps of the things that I missed. But throughout my discernment, throughout the road for the diaconate, she was always there with me. And this wasn't an overnight process. This was not something that just, okay, I'll do this week. Because it's a 6-year program minimum here in the Diocese of Baton Rouge. We discerned for over a year before we ever started. So it's something that both of us had to be committed to and understand the commitment that it took for both of us, because we had small children at the time when I started. And when I talk to other parents about vocations, and not necessarily that their son or daughter would have a yearning or a call for priesthood or religious life, a lot of them are tentative about, well, I don't really know what I would do in that situation if my son came to me and said, hey, I want to be a priest, or my daughter came to me and said, hey, I want to be a religious sister. And it's a tough thing for some parents to take a bite of. It's like, well, he needs to go out and make money. He needs to have a job. He needs to have a wife. I need grandchildren. But it's also something that a lot of people embrace, and a lot of people see, that a lot of people just know that we're here on this earth for a short period of time. What can I do to answer God's call? And so for those parents who see that, who profess that, who live that, it's a beautiful call. And those young men that we have as seminarians now, their parents are behind that 100%. I know that I would be if my son came to me and said, hey, Dad, what do you think? And I think it would be terrific, certainly. But I know there are a lot of tentative parents too. But I think when they look back at it and say, God is asking my son to become a priest, or God is asking my son to be a religious brother, I think eventually they grasp onto that and say, yeah, that's a good thing.
I know that in previous generations, there was always the concern maybe a young man or a young woman's vocation is actually their parents, that they're getting pressured by parents to enter into that life. In this generation, we almost have the opposite, where even some of the people we've spoken to on this show, that sometimes parents can be an obstacle. Sometimes there's a resistance and a tension between them when this possibility comes up. So it's important, and I think it's helpful for you to really testify to the cooperation, particularly from your mom, because that can mean so much when people have family support. It makes the transition so much smoother than having opposition and difficulties.
And if my mother had not been supportive, or if at some point in time she had said, well, that isn't really maybe something that you should even be thinking of, then that would have steered me probably away from it, or certainly made it much more of an obstacle to do what I did. But because she was supportive, and more so because my wife was supportive, who I'm with all the time, it just made it that much easier, and it made me much more focused on what I was doing, and the thought that the decision that I was making was the correct decision. But having my mom, and unfortunately my dad wasn't around to see me ordained, but to have my mom there, behind me the whole time, which she still is, and it was that support at home was really, really huge.
It does make a world of difference. Now, you've mentioned your wife a lot, and we're going to get to her fairly soon. We're going to take a break here for a moment. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your time at Catholic school. And then we want to talk about this important woman, your wife, who went through the discernment process with you and really helped you to become the deacon and the man that you are today. We'll be right back with Deacon Grant.
Hi, this is Deacon Jody Moscona. Join me for Catholic Life, ordinary people with extraordinary faith. These are your friends, your neighbors, members of your parish, and of course, the shakers and movers of Baton Rouge. That's Catholic Life, ordinary people with extraordinary faith.
Do you need a little light in your life? Tune in to the next episode of Beacons of Light, where we'll share the story of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul in action, serving God's poor and homeless. We'll share stories of our volunteers and our supporters, making the gospel come to life for those in need.
God's way is my way, God's shield is around.
The liturgical life of our diocese centers around our diocesan cathedral.
The cathedral is everyone's parish. Support from the bishop's annual appeal will help us host major diocesan functions and extend hospitality throughout our diocese.
For more information, please call 225-336-8790 or visit baabr.org.
Hi, I'm Austin Waite, and you're watching Catholic Life Television, which helps us evangelize in this year of faith.
Welcome back to Called to Serve. We're here with Deacon Grant, and we've been talking a little bit about his story of how he ended up in the ministry where he is today. Deacon, you said that you went to a Catholic boys' school and that some of the men there inspired you. I'd like you to take just a few minutes and tell us a little bit about anyone in particular or anything in particular that maybe planted some seeds for you as a young man that helped you in your journey to hear God's calling?
Well, unlike Catholic high school here in Baton Rouge, which lots of folks know about, and there are a few brothers who are still there, back in my time at St. Paul's, way back in the day, we had almost exclusively brothers who were teaching. We certainly had lay people teaching classes, but lots of brothers who were there, lots of good influences on us. And growing up, being a member of the community of Covington, being so close to the school, St. Paul's was something that even when I was a young boy, I'd go to watch football games on Friday nights, or my dad would bring me to basketball games just when I was a little kid. But then when I became a part of the school, it was something that, the school and I just became one. I was there all the time, in the various clubs, doing the various activities, going to all the games and the dances and all those things that we do, as high school boys. But the people that influenced me, the men who were there, the religious brothers, the brothers of De La Salle, who were the teachers there, who were the mentors there, were really men who not only showed us or taught us things, but they showed us how to live. They showed us how to grow up. They were outstanding role models for the Catholic faith and the things that they did and the presence that they had. And there was one brother in particular who I really became attached to. His name is Brother Ray Bulliard. Brother Ray at the time was the guidance counselor for my grade levels when I was there. So we spent lots of time, not because I was in trouble or necessarily needed guidance, but just, a friend, somebody who was there all the time, somebody who, when I was troubled or something, I could always go to see him after school or on weekends just because he was there. Brother Ray had since become the principal, and he is someone who still to this day, and that was a long time ago when I was in school, but someone today that I still call a friend, someone that we still keep in touch with each other. In fact, when I was married, he actually, I shouldn't say he preached the homily because a brother can't do that, but basically that's what he did, because he knew me better than anybody. And so I asked him to speak at the wedding. My wife just adores him, and he's a great person, a great role model for the kids that are still there today. But he is one that I can say, he was one of the first that I called to say, hey, I'm going to be a deacon. What do you think about that? And he was all for it.
Well, that's wonderful. I really wanted to bring this up, of course, because of the importance of Catholic education, that for many families, the children's faith formation happens in the home. But for those who are able to get a Catholic education, many times there are great examples, great role models that they find within the Catholic education system that do help to inspire vocations in one form or another through example of their own religious life or through the encouragement of young people in their faith.
And one of the things that my wife and I have spoken about with lots of people when we talk about educating our kids, one of the things that we have said is that we will always have them in a Catholic school. Maybe there are other schools out there that academically are more, exceptional, or maybe not, but that they get that daily dose of their Catholic faith. Speaking for the schools around here that my daughter attended and that my son now attends, they have these people around campus who are great examples of the faith, who are great role models for them. And I know my son attaches to a couple of the brothers who guide them, he asks questions of them, who mentors him. My daughter did the same thing with teachers at her school. So it's great that the high schools still have some of the religious who are there that are teaching, and that's something that is invaluable.
Well, before we close the interview, there is someone you are just dying to tell us about because you keep mentioning her. So I want to talk about this amazing wife of yours. Now, you say that you met in school and that there was obviously a discernment to marriage and then later on a discernment to your ministry of the diaconate. Did she have any idea what she was getting into when the two of you were going out? That she was going to be a part of this important ministry of the diaconate as a deacon's wife? Were there any indications to her, even early on, that she was going to be embarking on this kind of journey?
Probably not, but I can say that I owe a lot to her, and she was probably the one who ultimately, said, this is something that you really need to keep putting off, and to go for it. We discerned marriage for 6 years. We dated a very long time before we ever got married. We got married on December 26th, which just so happens to be the feast of St. Stephen, one of the patron saints of the diaconate, who on the day of December 26th, I had no idea who St. Stephen was. But obviously now, knowing he's the patron saint of my ministry. She is someone who was, as you had told me, as you asked me about my faith growing up, her family lived it all day long, every day. Both of her parents, her siblings, they did all of the things growing up that we as Catholics do. And her going to Catholic grammar school here in Baton Rouge, she learned all of those things that the kids are supposed to learn that I missed out on. So she had that behind her. And even when I was kind of wishy-washy in my faith at some point in time, she was the one who just, kept me going. She was the one who kept it going for me. When the fire wasn't necessarily burning so bright, but, let's go on Sundays, she was the rock behind me. She was the one who kept me going. And then ultimately when I got that calling again, she was the one pushing me forward to say, yeah, it's time for you to take that. And going through discernment for us, we did it together. It was, when you're a permanent deacon, your wife is almost like a permanent deacon too. She's not the one ordained, but she's behind everything that we do. And so lots of the things that I do as a deacon, we do together. And she still proofreads my homilies and tells me if they're good or bad, and and all those things. But even to this day, she's behind everything that I do as a deacon, and my ministry wouldn't be complete without her being a part of it.
It's really wonderful to hear that aspect because, of course, many of the people we talk to sharing vocation stories are called to the celibate life as religious sisters, as priests, as seminarians. But the important role of the deacon includes this partner that is such an important role in the life of the deacon that discernment process is never just alone.
Right.
There's always as a team. As she was growing with you in this, as you were doing the discernment together, did you find that there were struggles? Did you find that there were obstacles in your journey to the diaconate?
There were a few, and those being that at the time that I started formation, both of our children were very young. And when they're at school all day, Monday through Friday, and they're doing their little activities, and the weekends were really the time that we had for them, well, then Daddy needed to be away one of those 2 days that we have with them because our classes were all days on Saturdays. So for her making the classes, that wasn't always a thing that she was able to do because we had kids at home that she wanted to be with as much as I did. So that was hard, and that they really wanted both the husband and the wife to be together for all the classes, for all the formation. For us, it just wasn't feasible. But as they got older, and after I was ordained, and they were getting out more on their own, then she got to become more on board with the things that I do. With even now as a deacon, with the different aspects and things that I do, she's there to help. And we pray together, and we do, different little ministries together, and it's really great to have her as a part of that. I didn't realize back then how important and instrumental she would be in my faith development today, and hopefully my kids will one day appreciate the same thing that she did for them, because she instilled that so much better than I did. But she's very good at doing those things for our entire family.
Well, that's wonderful, because for me as a religious, I have a community, obviously, that I live with, and the domestic church, the husband, the wife, the children coming together and supporting one another in the faith, encouraging, uplifting, edifying. That's so important. And to hear that important role that she was able to play, both as wife and mother, in being a part of that, well, that's its own vocation right there. I mean, that's also an important part of the family life and of your ministry.
And I'm very lucky to have that. I know seeing the priests who, our diocesan priests who just live in the house that they live in, they don't have that person to go home to tonight, to go home to. They don't have that person who they can confide in for various things that they need to confide in. But I do have her at home, and so she kind of keeps me balanced. When I'm tipping too far, in one direction, she keeps me and brings me back to center. Our diaconate community is very strong in that the various classes get together. I know our class, even though we were ordained a long time ago, we still get together monthly for dinner where we can, chew each other's ear for a little bit. But when I go home every single night, I know that there's somebody there that's there to, okay, how was it? What happened today? What do I need to know about? And so I get that every single day, which I kind of feel sorry for some of the priests who don't have that. They go home to an empty house or they don't get that. And so it's good when the priests get together. They have a chance to get to see, their friends. But I get to see my friend every night.
The importance of them building community, the sort of community that I might have as a religious or you have as a family man, certainly that's so important.
Yes.
Well, Deacon, our time is almost up, and we certainly do want to thank you for joining us and really sharing with us the important story of how permanent deacons, an important ministry within the diocese, how some of the men who have come into that ministry. I always laugh when people will ask me, will the church ever have married clergy? And I always laugh and say, we already have married clergy. We have permanent deacons.
That's right.
I said we don't have commonly priests who are married, but certainly within the clergy, the permanent diaconate is an important part, and the stories of the men with children, with wives, who feel that call and devote themselves to the church in that way. It's important that story is told, and so we really do want to thank you for coming and sharing that with us.
Appreciate you having me.
I just want to remind our viewers once again to continue praying for the ministers that you know here in the diocese and in your life, for the deacons, for the priests, for our bishop, and to continue praying for vocations so that young men and women might continue to discern their vocation as sisters, permanent deacons, priests, or brothers, so that they too might answer the call to serve. God bless you and have a good day.